Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's a great honor and responsibility to talk in front of you about an important element of this war. This is Russian culture as a tool in the war. Why we as Ukrainians can talk about that? Because we have studied Russian language and Russian culture. We have experience of Russification. We know what it results in. My presentation is entitled Shots of Love. The Imperial Russian Ballet made a performance in Moscow, and in the end of this performance, the tanks started shooting, and the moderator said that it was a shot of love. And there is also a Russian saying, if the husband beats you, this means that he loves you. So I will reduce my presentation, but it's very big, so I'll be very fast. We spent some time within the Russian cultural space. So we know that the culture is becoming instrumental in the internal market. If it works very well there in Russia, why don't they apply the same methods on the outside? However, not everyone knows that. The international community is not aware, so we have to provide our explanation. Some time has elapsed since 2014, and the one 2022 started long ago. So many voices say that we have to differentiate between war and culture. There are lots of people who are fond of Russian ballet or fond of Anna Netrebko's songs. It's not the same as attacks against Ukrainian pediatric hospitals. So Russian ballet is not the same as Russian army in Pokrovsk. But let's check what narrative Russia disseminates. Here are the key disseminations, key narrative used by Russia to justify the war. One of them is the protection of Russian-speaking population, and secondly, restoration of so-called historic justice. Let me remind you that of the past 10 years, Russia changed nearly all its strategic documents. Quite recently, you have heard that Putin's statement about amending the nuclear doctrine. Nearly the half of these documents pertain to the cultural area. Let me briefly summarize three main statements. First, they are going to intensify the protection of Russian-speaking population and the use of Russian language. Then protection and dissemination of the so-called Russian world. And finally, more active cooperation with the so-called compatriots. This is quite a strange term which they have invented, but they do not imply people with Russian citizenship. They are not Russian nationals. They include other people interested in Russian culture to this category of compatriots. They also make a statement about being a civilizational state which does not belong neither to Europe nor Asia. This is a kind of the third type civilization. That's why they would like to protect and restore historic truth and remind about the role of Russia in the global history. The strategy of the national security also has mention of protecting traditional values and national memory. They've got also the concept of the humanitarian policy implemented abroad. It's also about this compatriots and creating and enhancing the information and cultural space. Aimed especially at the post-Soviet countries. Unless you have visited these post-Soviet countries, you won't know that this concept is all about Russification and a dilution of other national identities, erosion of these identities. Then they've got also a document intended for the occupied territories and their integration in the Russian cultural space. The Russification is not the natural process. It's not free of the governmental umbrella. They talk a lot about compatriots and the Russian language being the elements of the national security. Pursuant to these documents, Russia believes it can take measures both symmetric and asymmetric, if anything threatens the Russian world. In 2006, Vladimir Putin started using this term very actively. I mean, this Russian world at that time. He brought together the representatives of the Russian elites in St. Petersburg. So he said it is not about the geographic boundaries. It is about everyone who is fond of Russian history and culture. These are main ideologists. I think I have to quote Mr. Surkov. He says that the Russian world is where people are afraid of Russian weapons and respect our writers and philosophers. So this is the quote. Russians say that if you do not respect our culture, we will come to you with our tanks. Speaking about the concept itself, I can say that it's not new. It has been subject to many transformations. It was born in the last century by the so-called white immigration. At that time, it was an idea of a hybrid between Tatar Mongols, Russians, and then it was developed by Humilov, by Dugin, and now they are talking about the civilizational state. So Russian world has become a political platform for the aggression. If we had a huge budget for promoting the Russian culture, we would see Russian flag everywhere. And now let's talk about the pillars of cultural diplomacy of Russia abroad.
There are three of them, but there's by many more of those things, agencies like there's politicians and just people, citizens, and that was created in March 2008, that kind of Russian cooperation, but it is the umbrella that goes back a long way to 1925. That's the Ruski Mir Foundation and Public Diplomacy Fund by Garchikov. And this is all embedded into the presidential state vertical, and they organize the vast majority of events abroad. Now, just a few examples. That's the public figures that are popular in the West. That's the people that were pleased and commended by the European platform. Vergiev, who is the director of the Bolshoi Theater. This is Miss Netrepko. Netrepko wants to wander off a little bit, just to be distanced a little bit, but we know that she supported the war, the special military operation, and she collected money. She organized drives to collect money for those in Donbass, and this is Russian fashion. And we know that the Russian fashion designers and Russian fashion figures are present on international platforms. On top of that, New York Times talks about Miroslava Duma. That's one of the three figures in the Russian fashion that changed the world's idea of Russia, and they propose the Russian luxury image, but she herself, she positions herself as something with the family, but she is engaged in arms supplies to the Ukrainian war. Another figure is the prima ballerina Zakharova. She is from the single Russia party, Yedina Rossiya, and there is a huge number of sports people and culture people talking about the Russian world and so on, because they were made so, and that's the only way to be successful in Russia. That's the doctrine, to support the ruling party and be an advocate for that party and promote it, because if you don't support, you're out on a limb right on the way. And we know pianist, virtuoso pianist, Denis Matsuyev, we know him as a person that puts up gigs to the military Russia and promotes the Russian world. There is Mr. Kosachev, who's running the Russian cooperation, and he said that includes Russians, first of all, that Russian world, and that includes somebody having business or related to or being cohabited or spoused or whatever it is. Just interested in Russia, interested in literature, in space. That's all the people of the world, pertains to everyone of the world, you name it. And now a few examples on how those activities look as they were organized by those doers. That's Serbia supporting Donbas children, Mikhalkov, the director, the gloomy and dreadful figure. He's a chauvinist, he's a stickler for the Russian world and the Russian houses or homes translated in that's his work, translated into different languages and spread around countries. That's the one in Ankara against the crimes of Kyiv regime and past way of war. Recently there is lots of reiteration on the on its higher footprints on the global south with higher budgets. You can see Venezuela, and there's an exhibition with the books with some made-up story about the Ukrainian war crime. There's also a film that was presented on the Venice Festival that's about the poor Russian boys that are soldiers and therefore victims to the war, that are simply acting on the order from Putin. And this one is a Russian documentary about the special military operation SMO that rolls out in where you can see the different countries like Azerbaijan and so on. Or there's like a radical example, there's a cultural association, there's a community of people that organize events, that go talk to the media. They talk about those things like occupation of Mariupol is the liberation of Mariupol, while Kyiv is ruled by the junta. And that's a very good explanation of how the Russian culture and their policy work in the occupied territories. But in reality, wherever Russia goes, they repeat the same scenario with its troops. They murder and they torture Ukrainian patriots. They rape Ukrainian women. They look for collaborators, and they bring from the country, they export from the country the Ukrainian children, and they steal them. They steal cultural heritage. What they can't do, they ruin. What they can't steal. And this is how many cultural heritage sites and objects were destroyed. Among them, Skovoroda Museum that was damaged in Kharkov, the World Museum so-called. Like the first thing they do, they sort of they seize and they burn Ukrainian textbooks, school textbooks, and they not only bring in those Russian textbooks for Russian schools, and that's especially for the occupied territories. Special editorial editions for occupied territories. Just remember those places, those little cities, the little towns, and they get those textbooks, those children that say that historically their proper region is the proper part of Russia. But if there is such a level before the occupation, I mean, how they got ready before the occupation and how to indoctrinate those children for brainwash, and that's how they prepared, how hard they prepared. It took them a hard time, and that's a concept of like patriotic nurturing, upbringing. And now also the Ukrainian children, about 5,000 children belong to the Russian patriotic groups, and they prepare them to go into the army someday, yes, naturally. And that's about the Soviet cultural monuments of culture, which make some markers of power, like that's your rapist, that's your executioner, okay. And here we got like the theft of our art, destruction of monuments in Kherson. They took everything out, like in Crimea back in 2014. That's actually destruction of memory, of human memory, because what they stole in Kherson were archives and censuses back in time, so people never more know about their ancestors and their past. On the occupied territories, they are running and rolling out more powerfully their cultural program, educational program. They try to get people hooked on their new identity as they are injured and traumatized by the war. Just a few words to remind you of how it is working. As Russia sort of appropriates somebody else's names, non-Russian names, I mean non-Russian public figures or authors that are still being displayed as Russian artists or Russian film directors and so on. Though Russia, which is interesting, does not have any logical feeling of logical error in their heads. Russia, that they call successor to the Soviet Union, and they put up monuments to Stalin all over the country, and then they also help and they give benefit to victims of Stalin regime. That was the concept of Mr. Weinstein and the women he raped, and they say it, and they can very well wrap their heads around those things. You know, we know how it works from Soviet Union. They bring the people in, and they surround them with a lot of love, a lot of warm feeling, and they sort of create parallel reality. That was the case in back in the 30s of the 20th century, where everyone was swelling of starvation, artificially created. If you remember that, those stories, and those artists and people of art were executed, but the propaganda said that it is actually better, life is better, and the collective farmers are pretty successful, and so on and so forth. And then Jean-Paul Sartre said that the person is in the center of everything, which is individuality. And in parallel, we sort of remember those repressions against Ukrainian artists. But at that time, we should have said that some parallel reality was created for them, and as the Germans said during the Second World War, that they didn't know about the atrocities of the Nazi regime. Today's situation is a little bit more difficult. Our complicated because they still keep creating some alternative reality to those world stars. Like you travel to Russia, you go to a Russian ballet performance, and what do? You make a conscious choice. It was before, but now the world has changed. There are several figures. The European Parliament, that's a nice source, as they made a survey in which countries the people don't support sanctions against Russia. That's with the biggest footprint and with the biggest Russian command. As we know, in Germany, except for Western, Eastern, and the Eastern Germany, the people know Russian better, and they don't support the sanctions against Russia, and vice versa is in West Germany. And now, just before I wrap up, I've heard very often that metaphor. We talk about the Russian culture being a Trojan horse that is very attractive and beautiful on the outside, but in the middle it's got the kinjals, the tanks, the missiles, the blood, and the cannon fodder of the Russian aggression. And this metaphor is that the Russian culture is the sacked and looted Mariupol theater, which is a wreck, while it symbolizes something on the outside, but it was destroyed, and that's where Ukrainian children were killed and bombarded consciously by the Russians, knowing there were children there. And now that's a writer, an author, world known, not enough well known. And I think it should have been known much better. That's a person that founded that ideology of Russia's exception, exclusion, like exemption, whatever. The Russians can do what no other guys can do. That's the one who initiated that idea.